Hi, everybody, and welcome back. I am really excited. I have Curtis back with me today. Hi, Curtis.
Hello.
And we are going to chat about mules and kind of their role in horse culture. And I know that this is like a particular interest for you, so I'd love if you could just start with kind of where they came from. I mean, as far as I know, mules can't make more mules. So, like, how did we first come up with a mule?
Yeah, they're super interesting. Mules kind of go back as far as we've got for recorded history. We've got sort of records of mules first being bred in northern Turkey about 6,000 years ago. And they just kind of show up in various roles. In the ancient world, mules are, at that time, they were kind of, at various points in time, mules are kind of like status symbols because they do require sort of deliberate breeding, and they require special considerations to make mules, and not everybody's making them at this time. And according to some of the reading I've done, I'm not a scholar of this by any stretch, but according to some of the reading I've done, the Hebrew Bible prohibits crossbreeding. And so, like, in kind of the ancient Israeli area, mules have to be imported because you can't make them there. And so, yeah, they end up kind of being a status symbol. And so, they show up like in the Bible, sort of at funerals of kings and places like that. And then by kind of Roman times, they end up being kind of prized work animals. I think my favorite example of this is there's a town called Ostia Antica near Rome, and it's kind of like a port town transportation hub area. And different guilds had sponsored the construction of different baths. And one of them is the Mule Drovers Baths. And so they're, Roman baths with these tile works, and they've got pictures of mules on them and pictures of carts being pulled and stuff like that. And we've actually got names of some of those mules because they're in that kind of tile work. Under some of these mules is their names. So we've got like ancient mules named Tipsy, Modest, Lame, and Dainty. Which honestly are just absolute bangers for mule names. You really can't do better than a lot of those. So yeah, they kind of show up there. Some older like army manuals, and I've never found a place to really confirm this in any other source, but some older army manuals talk about the sawbuck saddle being used by like the Mongols and with Genghis Khan and that sort of thing. So yeah, mules just kind of show up in the ancient world, really without any preamble. They just sort of roll in and are kind of like today. They're sort of an oddity. So some people are super into them, and they're already kind of set up to be this work animal that other people are super into for that.
That's so cool. I love that we have their names. That's extremely fun. Obviously not all of them, but some of them. I don't know how often that happens, that we get just like recorded, like we get distinct records of like people's pets. That's so fun.
Yeah, I really like it because you get lots of recorded horse names for like famous people's horses. I don't think you get any like recorded ox names, and so I think it's interesting that mules are kind of in the middle here. Like, yeah, we've got a few mule names.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense if they were seen as these like status symbols, like you said, that there would be a little bit more record of them. I guess oxen are just kind of like, yeah, that's, oxen 1 and oxen 2, they plow my field. And
right, yeah, we'll eat them later, I guess. But
and you and I started talking about mules because I told you about my insane idea to ride a horse across the country, and I was debating between a mule and like a little Mustang as a pack horse, and you said, oh no, do a mule. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what makes a mule so good as a pack animal.
Yeah, and before the Mustang people come for me, I I love Mustangs, and I've used them in the backcountry a lot. But leading horses will give you ulcers. It's just medical science. And so, yeah, I'm strongly team mule, especially for packing. There's, I think, a few things that make mules a little bit better than horses, or probably donkeys. Donkeys, I think they're good for this, but they're also just a little bit smaller. You know, you can't carry quite as much. So yeah, I'm strongly team mule. They just do a really good job. So I'm trying to explain this, and it's not translating super well into podcast form because, like, I'm trying to arch my back here a little bit. But mules are just they're very aware of every part of their body. And so, like, I'm sure people have already heard that they're, like, sure-footed and, you know, kind of pay attention that way. But they also are very aware of, like, the pack that's on them and kind of how that acts. And so you can have an experienced pack horse that you can take into the backcountry, and they will hit every tree with their pack. Sometimes it feels like they're doing it on purpose. You're just like, this is statistically unlikely. And the first couple times you put a pack on a mule, they might like tag stuff a little bit. But after maybe a half hour of walking around with it, they'll figure it out where it is. And so they'll sort of arch themselves or curve around trees, or, you know, kind of hike themselves up over rocks and things like that to miss it. So that's one reason. And I've seen some pack horses be good at this, but just as a general rule, like, mules are just so much, I don't know, easier to get along with sometimes when you're leading them. They kind of don't get that competitive, you know, who's going to be first sort of thing. They're just like, all right, well, I'm just going to follow this guy and see where we end up with. Which isn't to say that, like, mules are just inherently more trusting. Like, a mule will ask sometimes, like, why you're doing something. And if you don't explain it well enough, they'll be like, no, I'm not interested in this. I'm going to unsubscribe from your whole letter. But yeah, just as a general rule, like, an experienced pack mule is just so much, handle them more on autopilot than, like, even an experienced pack horse, in my experience.
Yeah. One thing that I've heard about mules that I'm curious about is I've heard that they are stubborn creatures. So I'm kind of surprised to hear you say that they're easier to lead. Have you, like, are they stubborn? Or is it when they're being ridden that they're more stubborn? Or is this just, like, mule slander?
A little bit. Well, it's a little both. So like I said, a mule, like, there's relationships are really important with a mule. There's a lot of trust building that you have to do, because they do have more they have donkey in them, right? And so rather than being a purely flight animal like a horse, and just anytime something pops up, they're like, oh no, we're just going to flee across the boundless plains. You know, donkeys and mules are kind of more mountain animals. And so fleeing isn't always the only option. And so they kind of have to think things through a little bit. And so they will think things through. And if if they don't trust what you're doing, if they don't understand what you're doing, or if you try to hurry them, or if you try to, force them, they'll say, no, I'm not doing this. Yeah, you'll get people who, meet a mule for the first time and try to treat him like, your old bay gelding, and just try to push him into a place, and you'll just be like, no, I want to see your resume before I do this.
That's extremely reasonable, actually. I just being like, I need a little bit of proof that you know what you're saying.
Yeah, no, they're pretty reasonable animals, honestly.
Yeah, it makes sense, though, that they would develop a reputation for being stubborn, in the same way I think that, like, mares have a reputation for being, like, mean. It's just that people like the old bay gelding who just does what he's told without really questioning it. And as soon as there are questions, it gets challenging, because then you have to actually, your training has to stand on its own feet instead of just an assumption of correctness.
Yeah, exactly. They will push back a little bit and just, see if that's what you really want to do. And so I think that's where a lot of that reputation for stubbornness comes from.
I never thought about the mountain habitat as an aspect of it too. Like I always knew that donkeys are more willing to pick a fight with something than a horse is, but I totally didn't consider the environmental reasons for that. Like, of course, there are times when a donkey could be backed up to a cliff. Like it can't run. It's got to do something else.
Yeah. So rather than being dialed entirely to flight, they've got to kind of think it through a little bit, and and then they can take you in some instances, and so they've got that in the back of their mind, and so they've got to kind of sort through that.
How much are mules impacted by how much is a mule temperament impacted by what breed of horse it's crossed with? Or are they kind of across the board more dominated by the donkey side?
I think that's a good question. And, that most of my experience with is kind of with draftier, more cold-blooded mules. And so, Belgian mules, Percheron mules, kind of carrying that just because they're thicker and bonier. And so that's what we used more in the backcountry for, packing and also for driving. And so that's where most of my experience is. But at Mule Days in Bishop, there's all kinds of different events for all kinds of mules. And so there's roping and barrel racing, and they have gated mule classes and dressage and things like that. And so I think just conformation and gait and temperament wise, I think there is definitely a correlation, but I think it gets, I think that correlation might get smoothed out a little bit just kind of with, whether it's a mammoth jack or just a donkey or something like that. I think it gets smoothed out a little bit. So a Tennessee walking horse isn't going to be quite the same as a gated, donkey, as a gated mule. But there's going to be a lot of overlap.
Yeah, that makes sense. I also just had to do a quick Google search about Mule Days because this is something I have never heard of before, and it looks like so much fun.
Yeah, so I'm originally from Bishop, California, and my family was super involved with Mule Days. My grandma was the first female president back in the 80s, and then my mom and my aunt worked for the organization for a long time. So, I grew up going to Mule Days and doing some of the events and things. If you want to learn more about mules, there's just a ton of, different mules there, which I think is super valuable. Because like I said, they have dressage events and they have pack scramble and they have, driving events, and basically all disciplines are represented.
Moving back to specifically pack mules, you've got a new mule, you're getting it ready, you're going to start training it. How do you train a pack animal?
A lot of it, especially with a mule, for me, my preference for that first few months is just relationship building, just going out, hey, let's have some treats, let's do some groundwork, let's, kind of sort through what we're going to do here. It's pretty straightforward. It's on some of the old, pack stations or ranches and stuff, they had this bell system. Or the military had this bell system for mules where they would cut it in the mule's tail hair. They would cut one bell for if they were able to be packed, one if they were able to be driven, and one if they were able to be ridden. So, you could have up to 3 bells on them. But packing was kind of the baseline, and kind of one of the old sayings is if you can touch them, you can pack them. That's from an older time when they were comfortable with tying them up to do it. But there's a lot of overlap with training a mule or a horse to ride, just kind of starting with the saddle pad and working on getting sacked out that way. The big difference is for pack equipment, the saddle pad is much heavier than like a standard riding saddle pad, and the saddle itself is much lighter. And it's got a britchin and a collar, and usually 2 cinches. So there's a little bit, extra to get them used to. But if you were going to teach one to pack, you just kind of follow a lot of the same steps. Get them used to the saddle pad, get them used to the saddle, and then there's bags on. Well, you got to get them used to what's going to be on the side, whether you're going to use, a Decker saddle or a sawbuck saddle. Will dictate kind of what those bags look like, but you have to get them used to the bags on either side and kind of how that flops around a little bit. And then probably the scariest thing is getting the top load on there and then putting a tarp on it and throwing that tarp over. And that, just getting them sacked out to that movement and that sound, because, it's kind of a big, scary sounding tarp going over there. But yeah, honestly, it's, I think I'm making it sound more complicated than it is. But it's, just kind of that series of steps similar to training one to ride or drive or anything else. You just kind of start from the ground up.
Yeah, and you mentioned 2 different types of saddles. I have not heard of either one. What do these saddles look like? What's the difference?
So there's a few different types of saddles. And so out here, like in the Eastern Sierra and most of the states out here on the far west, they use what's called the sawbuck saddle because we're right. But it's basic. If you think of like a classic pack saddle, it's a hard wood tree with two forks that come up and make like an X over the top of the animal's spine, and then we call them panniers. You can call them kayaks, or you can get boxes or slings. There's all kinds of stuff that you can hook onto them. Hook those on the side and then build your top load on top of that. And so that's a sawbuck. It's the oldest type of pack saddle. Anytime you find evidence of pack saddles from before, that's kind of what you find. Like I said, in some of those old manuals, they talk about, Genghis Khan using sawbuck saddles. So that's kind of my trump card. Anytime I argue with somebody about, sawbuck versus Deckers, like, what are you better than Genghis Khan? Like, get over yourself. But anyway, that's the sawbuck saddle. The other major kind of modern saddle is called the Decker. And it's similar it's newer. You find the Decker comes around, I think, in the late 19th, early 20th century with Forest Service packers in like Idaho, Wyoming, Montana, Utah. Those places are where you find Decker saddles mostly. It's kind of a similar build, but instead of those forks, you just kind of have these kind of hoop sort of things this just bar that joins both sides in the front and the back. And you take a tarp, and they call it mantying. So you manty these your side loads and tie them together, and then hang them on those hoops, and then build your top load from there. And honestly, the biggest difference is just kind of how you prepare that load, whether you put it in a bag or whether you put it in a manty, or and then there's a little bit of a difference with like the hitches and stuff, but the mechanics are pretty similar. The British Army had what was called I'm going to mispronounce this, but the Otago pack saddle for a bit, and it was sort of optimized for carrying military supplies and for carrying out wounded soldiers and stuff. But the Decker and the sawbuck, especially in the United States, those are kind of the 2 main ones that you're going to run into.
Very cool. And so what makes a horse so much worse in your eyes to load and pack?
Like I said, I think it's just, kind of, there's the sort of, being dialed 100% up to flight can make it difficult, especially, if you hit something and, a pot or a pan rattles around. There's a little bit more of a struggle there. They'll just kind of bolt without stopping to wonder whether that was going to kill them or not. But yeah, kind of like I said, they'll bump into stuff a little bit more, and just kind of not be as cognizant of where that pack is in time and space as they kind of go over obstacles and things. And you just, with some horses, they kind of get that competitive, which one of us is going to be first sort of deal. And you just don't run into that as often with mules. They're just kind of like, hey, all right, well, we'll all get there at the same time.
That's so reasonable. What a reasonable way to approach life.
A very reasonable animal. Honestly, like if you just could put any single adjective to mules, I would generally just say reasonable.
Well, as somebody who's thinking about doing a crazy journey, that's like a good quality to have is reasonable. I need somebody to be.
Yeah, and there's other, their feet are generally smaller and harder, so, they're easier to keep sound, don't require as much feed, a little more heat resistant. I have a list of sort of mule virtues if you
I would love to hear the mule virtues.
But yeah, I think that's, kind of it is just that hybrid vigor. They're a little bit hardier, a little bit more, like I said, heat resistant. They don't require as much water or feed, a little bit more insect resistant. One thing actually, when I was preparing for this episode, is I was just reading mule things like you do. And one thing I came across was that mules score higher on cognition tests than either of their parents do. And so mules tend to have higher scores on these tests than either just straight donkeys or horses. They kind of have that hybrid vigor.
That's really neat.
Yeah, I think that they're a reasonable choice for just about anything you can do. Yeah,
that's really cool. And so you have mules, right? Or you have at least one mule?
Yeah. So I grew up with and around mules. And then just this last year, actually, I finally pulled the trigger and I bought 2 mules out of Oklahoma. They came off a farm where they mostly just kind of pulled a wagon with corn in it, and then brought them out here to Nevada in the winter, which was a shock for them. But they're doing good.
Oh my gosh. And are they both pack animals for you, or do you ride them? Or are you planning to?
Yeah, so I'm kind of working on making them, just good all around animals. So I've been packing them. I took just one actually this summer, kind of on an in and out pack trip, just to go drop off some feed for a friend who was doing his own longer pack trip. So I took him into the mountains, and it was his first trip. And like I said, kind of after 20 minutes, half an hour, he sort of figured out exactly, where his pack was, and already started kind of moving through the trees and doing well, picking his, as we were going over the rocks in the mountains, he was kind of picking where he was going to step down pretty well and that sort of thing. But yeah, so I've been working on packing them, and then we've been working on riding as well, just kind of learning, real basic stuff. They're not going to, my goal isn't for them to be fancy riding mules or anything, just kind of safe, go down the trail, super easy to, put people on mules.
I feel like I have seen more mules in the last few years. Like there's like the mule who popped up in like the dressage circuit who got like a ton of attention. That was really cool. And like just random people, I feel like I've found more people who have mules. Like I don't know if you've seen like an increase in popularity, but I feel like as a casual observer of the horse world, I've seen more and more people with mules.
Yeah, I think we're kind of having a mule-essence right now. There was the mule that was in the dressage world, and then at the NFR this last year, one of the ropers had a mule in the opening ceremony. I don't think he used it during any of the actual events, but I think he used it in a few of his events, just on the circuit. So, yeah, I think you're kind of seeing that. I don't know, my Facebook social media algorithms already show you what you want to see. So, like, I've been seeing a lot of mules on social media, but that could just be kind of a function of the almighty algorithm. But, when I was looking for the mules, I talked to quite a few a few mule dealers who that's kind of their whole thing. And the price of mules really has gone up in the last few years because people just want them. So
darn it.
I think you're seeing a bit of a spike in demand for them.
Yeah. So you said mule dealers. I don't even know if I mean, I would Google it. I would figure it out. But just thinking about it right now, I don't even know where to start to find a mule. I could find 12 horses in 5 minutes on Facebook, but I could not tell you where to find a mule.
Yeah, it's a little bit similar to the horse world, just a little bit more specialized. So there are, out here in the West, we don't have a ton of mule breeders. We've got some, but there's not a ton that do kind of the bigger, heavier mules that you would want for a pack string. And so there's a few people who kind of make their living buying mules back east, especially in the Southeast, kind of, Georgia, Tennessee, Kentucky, up into like Amish country and Pennsylvania and stuff. They'll buy mules out there and then bring them out west where there's not as many, so they're more expensive and drop them out here. I don't know. It's enough of a living for at least a few people. So, there's kind of an odd little underground industry. Not really underground, but just there's an odd little industry of people who kind of shuttle mules from one side of the country to the other.
That's really interesting because I feel like the East Coast is not where I look for the cheap horses. Like, I feel like the cheap horses come from like the Midwest and like the West Coast, which I'm sure is also because there's like more Mustangs and stuff out that way. But it's interesting that there are more mules over here and more horses over there. Yeah,
it's kind of an they're kind of used more on farms and things like that. So a lot of my understanding, again, which is just coming from these mule dealers who kind of come over, the Amish farms will have their carriage horses and the standard bred horses that you kind of see them on the road with, but then when they get back to their farm, they use a lot of mules and things for their teams for the work on those farms. And so you'll get them from the Amish there, but also just kind of a lot of the smaller farms back there just kind of have mules for doing some of that work, and they'll have them out there, and then they bring them back out west.
That's really cool. Well, I feel like I have learned an awful lot about mules. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we've missed, though, before we wrap up?
No, I think we covered it. If you're going to learn to pack, I think the only thing we didn't really super cover was there's a couple main types of hitches that you'll have to learn. There's a box hitch, which kind of its main function is, it's for hauling like hard-sided things in boxes, and it kind of pulls the load away from the mule at the bottom. And then there's a diamond hitch, which kind of pulls up it's kind of for softer stuff. So it kind of pulls up the load and brings it down at the top. And then there's variations on those things. I think that's kind of a specialized part of packing that doesn't show up a lot, just because, it's really esoteric. Like, it's just a huge knot that you throw around these things. But I think that's probably the only thing we haven't covered so far.
Well, that makes sense. You have to tie everything together so it doesn't just go flying off into the abyss.
Right. Yeah. Which I did, because he might listen to this episode. I did, when I was working at a pack station, lose an entire kitchen box and have it get launched down a cliff while I was packing. And so, it can happen.
Oh my God. That's horrifying.
Yeah, it was my second or third year as a packer, and so I kind of felt like I kind of had this whole thing down. And we were coming down. Everything that day had just been long and late and hard, and so we were coming down kind of towards the evening, and we got kind of what I can only describe as like a Disney movie rainstorm. Like, it just all of a sudden was black and just coming down in sheets with like the occasional lightning strike that made everything like super bright. And we were coming down this area called Angel's Flight, which is like a staircase that they blasted into the side of a mountain. And so there's like this 300 or 400 foot cliff off to one side. And we were going down these switchbacks, and I had stupidly put this kitchen box on a top load. And then I tied it down. I was like, yeah, I got this. This is close enough. And it wasn't. And so we were coming down, and I heard something just like in the dark, just like smash in front of me and then fall down the hillside. And I thought, God, I hope that's not George. And then like, we got the Disney movie lightning strike. And I got to look down, and the box was just like scattered into a million pieces. And there was just silverware and stuff scattered all down. So it does and can happen.
Oh, yeah. No, I believe it. That's... Oh, boy. Yeah. It's scary. It's not what you want. Well, thank you so much, Curtis. This was so much fun to chat with you. And I know you've shouted them out before, but do you want to shout out where people can find you on socials and your website and all of that fun stuff? Yeah,
so most of what I do kind of creatively is I write short stories, and I've got a couple books that I've been trying to get published. I put one publisher out of business. I don't think it was my fault, but they went out of business before my book had come out. But anyway, my website is where I post kind of everything that has been published, and it's just curtismoorewrites.com. And then my Instagram, kind of where I put all that stuff up, is M&H Writers.
Awesome. Perfect. And I will link those in the description. So if you want to hear more from Curtis, check that out. And in the meantime, we will talk to you later.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us this week at the Horse Girl Gazetteer. You can find us online at Horse Girl Gazetteer on Facebook or Instagram, and Horse Girl Gazette on TikTok and Patreon. You can email us questions or comments at hello@horsegirlgazetteer.com. If you find yourself enjoying our content, please leave us a review to help others find their way here. Any and all support is greatly appreciated. Talk to you later.